Linux OTC. Welcome to episode 21. We're your hosts. I'm Bill.
I'm Eric.
And I'm not doing it this time.
And Leo is really not doing it this time. He is
Yes.
not with us, family stuff.
Yeah, he's
Totally
got a
get
hot
it.
date,
Totally dig it.
apparently. A hot waffle date with his daughter, which, to be honest, I mean...
I'm a little jealous. I
Yeah.
got to
right,
tell you.
man. Damn right, man.
I don't
'Cause
think
I
I'd
love-
be passing that up. I don't know.
Oh,
no,
no way.
it's just the thought of it is making me hungry.
I think
Well, that and the fact I didn't have lunch, but I mean, you know.
I think later on this evening I'm going to break out I bought this big set of sundae dishes to make ice cream sundaes in. I bought it like 3 years ago and I've never used them. They're still in the styrofoam. I think we're going to break those out tonight and have like a
Isn't
little...
it like the 2nd of December? It's not really, I mean, you know,
I
it's not
put
really
it to
ice
you
cream
that
season.
ice cream is good all year round. And
I do as well. I agree, but at the moment it's -5 or something outside, and you know,
it is a toasty 72 here in the house.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, even in Fahrenheit, it's going to be what 25, something like that. At the minute, it's
Yeah.
cold. It's suddenly
It's-
got cold.
Well, we're not going to go outside and eat it. We're gonna stay inside. We're
But anyway,
For the
it's-
record,
Yeah.
for the
So-
record, it's 84 degrees here right now. So
oh, you can just
Oh man, I used to have this conversation. Well, okay, no, I lie. I didn't have this conversation with my dad because I was too scared of him. But if I could have, when I was a kid, I would have said, Dad, what was wrong with Florida? What was wrong with Brisbane? Why did you have to emigrate from India to this place where it's freezing cold and it's dark and everything like that? And yeah, so I never really had the guts to say that. And once I told it to my mom afterwards, and she said, "Yeah, but you do have to realize that we come from an oven." You know, in India, you know, it's over 100 degrees and it's boiling hot and all this kind of stuff. So going to another warm place didn't really have the same attraction.
yeah. Well, we
If you
did the
know what-
opposite. We went from the cold climate, which I was pretty happy with,
where
to
at?
the. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and then we lived in New Jersey
Oh,
for about 10 years, and you kind of get used to the seasonality of things.
But you see, this is the thing. See, this is the thing about the UK. Because I remember I had the same conversation with one of my friends who's he's married a Canadian girl, and you know they go off to. She's from Montreal, and you know once a year they go off to Montreal, and I was kind of like, ooh, must get a bit chilly in the winter, and he goes, yeah, it does get very chilly in the winter, but the thing about, sorry, hold on, this is my late lunch time.
that got spilled.
I did that quite well, I thought, actually. Sorry, what was I saying? Yeah. So his missus is from Montreal, and I said, "It must get really chilly in the winter." And he goes, "Yeah, it does get really chilly in the winter, but it's got 4 discrete seasons. You know,
Yeah.
You know, the spring is the spring, the summer is the summer, the autumn, the fall, whatever you want to call it, is that, and the winter. Yes, it's cold, but you know it's going to be cold, so you have, you know." Budgeted for it, you've taken it into consideration with whatever you do. The thing with the UK is that we are a maritime temperate climate. So yes, so today is 25 degrees out. 3 days ago it was 50 degrees out. Do you know what I mean? It's just, and then you know we have had snow in December, in June. We have had it. It's not often, but it happens. You know,
Yeah.
and we have had Christmases where you know it's I wouldn't say tropical, but I mean it's mild spring weather. You know, and that's the issue. You can't. So like you know, it gets frustrating in the summer because you think to yourself, okay, I'll organize a barbecue, and then you organize a barbecue, and that's the day it will rain. You know, and the next day it'll be fine, and then you're like, oh, okay. So
But you can kind of count on rain. I mean, like you said, the maritime climate, you guys get so much rain.
yeah, you just have to assume it's always raining, basically.
Yeah.
So then when it doesn't happen, so like when what was it last year when it hit 40 degrees, you know, 110, right?
Yeah.
In this country, and it had never hit that ever before, ever. None of us knew what the hell to do. 'Cause it's like,
Yeah.
wait a minute.
Well, it's actually pretty dangerous, right? I mean, that's if you don't have as many people with air conditioning. You don't have a lot of people, you know.
Yeah, basically nowhere has air conditioning in the UK. basically.
Which kind of blows my mind because even
That's
if for
madness.
nothing else, the humidity. Because I can
Yeah.
I can handle higher temperatures, but humidity drives me crazy.
Yeah,
Like I just
yeah,
don't
yeah,
like
yeah.
being sticky. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
for that reason alone, I would just be like, okay, I'm gonna put in a like a window unit or something.
I remember my dad did put in ceiling fans,
Oh
which
well,
Yeah.
which
Not the
ceiling
same thing.
fans.
no,
Woo!
it's not the same thing at all. But I mean, even that was
Luxury.
I remember lots of people were kind of like, why have you done that?
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. But I would have to assume in India that like you literally would have to have ceiling fans. Like you would like
Yeah. Okay, so
boil.
my gnome sound recorder suddenly stopped. Whoops.
You know what? I was going to ask you if you're still using that, and I had
Okay,
considered using it, but the one
so
thing that Tenacity and Audacity do really well is recover. So if it crashes for whatever reason, so what I'm curious to see is, did your file save?
yeah, so my file did save. I've now
Okay.
restarted and I've restarted recording. Um, so there's going to be
It just
two
gives
on.
Bill something to do.
Been there before.
Well,
Yeah.
so listen, my recent experience is that I decided to volunteer to edit DistroHopper's Digest
Oh, okay.
because Tony's been doing it, and this is my 7th show this month, so that's almost 8 months of participating in the show, and I feel like all I really do is sort of show up and like, you know, talking to the mic and say, okay, thanks guys, see you next time. And there's more to it than that. I mean, you're preparing the show notes and doing the work of testing the distro and all that stuff. But it's kind of felt like Tony was getting sort of the short end of the stick there, where it's like he's not participating in the show itself, but he has, so like the blogger account is under his Gmail account, and he set up Red Circle and like all the stuff like he had sort of set up and had been responsible for, but now like that he's not participating. I kind of thought, it seems fair if maybe one of the people doing the show should do it. And honestly, I used to do podcast editing quite a lot and just haven't for years, and have forgotten the amount of effort that goes into getting 3 disparate streams, of recordings, lining them up, getting them sort of at the same levels. I realized, which I hadn't, and I still didn't
No,
fix.
you know what's
but,
fun is when you got 6 of them.
Oh,
And you
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, like, and you-
I did
Go
think
ahead.
this, when we were talking about, having more presenters on Mincast and stuff like that. It's like, it's great. Obviously, more people is good in content, but the logistics must get much, much more difficult.
Yeah, yeah.
It's slightly
mean-
more. I mean, once you've got the waveforms lined up, though, it's really the more people. It's slightly more effort, but most of the work is done after they're all lined up, and then you're going through it, and I've been putting more effort into all these shows lately, going through it and taking out parts where people are taking a drink of coffee or squeaky chair. Like my chair is really bad, so I go
Yeah.
through and do that. And then sometimes when people are talking over each other because of the awkward delay or whatever.
Well, editing is editing, right? You have to make decisions about because I not only is it the little fumbles or the noises or just sort of the overall kind of quality, the audio quality, but content as well. So there were definitely times in this latest episode where I had to make decisions about, yes, like talking over who wins in that, Also, just there were portions of conversations that kind of meandered a bit, and honestly, like that 10 seconds really didn't add anything, and I don't. So it's a weird thing as an editor because I don't want to take words out of someone's mouth because that's essentially what you're doing, and change the narrative. But at the same time, I think that in order to put out a good podcast, that there has to be some editorial control. There has to
Yes,
be,
absolutely.
a certain amount of like,
With great
okay,
power comes great responsibility.
Well, it's true.
Yeah.
It true. You have to make decisions when you're the one doing the editing. You can't go and ask the team every single time you run across
Right.
a situation
Yeah.
where you've got to decide: do I take this because you do run the risk of fundamentally changing the trajectory of a conversation just
Oh
by
yeah, yeah,
removing
definitely,
a few
definitely.
things. But if that, you have to make that decision. Would I be making the quality a little bit better by removing this little thing or moving this over here and that over there, and is that more important to the audience? You got to keep the audience in mind, I think.
Yeah.
Yep. And so you
So
have the content component of it, and like Bill's saying, I realized that I need to put a noise gate back on my mic because I catch a lot of breathing, which I wasn't aware of because I wasn't really listening for it. And
Hmm.
I don't on usually go back and listen to my own recordings. I just verify that they're there and that it's about the right size, and but once I mix them together and I've got three layers of conversation, I'm hearing breathing or I'm hearing this and that, and I'm starting to look, and the waveform isn't really high enough that you can see where it's coming from. So what I tend to do is anything that is silence on the part, where someone's not actively speaking, I will highlight that area and just blank it. Just get rid of everything that's on that channel because I don't really need that to carry over. You have to be careful because if you deaden things too much, then it sounds wrong. You have to leave some room in there. So the other thing I did was in the tracks themselves, where there's pauses or people taking breaths, I set it so that it reduces that by about 50%. So the breath noise is still there, but it's not as like in your ear, like someone, like it can get really obnoxious if you don't tone some things down.
Yeah, I
There's
mean,
so many
heavy
little,
breathing in people's ears normally gets you a restraining order from the police. Not
well,
that I have any idea of how that
or you,
happened, but
or you can just label it as ASMR, and then people love that too. So
oh yeah, 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 yeah.
I
well,
don't get that.
well,
ASMR sounds
it's
kind of
only for the
great.
people that get it.
Yeah,
um,
I
you have to make a decision on that too, because sometimes you have to decide, okay, if I put a noise gate on here, is it going to adversely affect the quality of the sound
Mm.
overall? And
yeah,
would it be doable just to take the breathing out during editing, which
yeah,
most of the time it's not. Once you get used to the workflow, it's not all that hard, because you'll see the way I do it. For example, I'm kind of scanning through it, and if I see like a large dense chunk of waveform on one person's track, then you really shouldn't see much of anything on somebody else's track. So that's where
yeah,
you kind of go and see, okay, what is this little bit of something right here, and is that sometimes somebody will be talking about something, and then another person will be kind of agreeable, just kind of, yeah, oh yeah, yeah, and then you want to kind of leave that in sometimes, just because of the, yeah, I do it too, just
Oh yeah, I
because
do
of
it all the time.
the interaction. You want to capture that magic of interaction between the people. But
I do
I
sometimes
do them.
wonder though whether silence can sometimes be off-putting. The
It
reason I
is.
said
I
the
truncate silence every time.
no, no, I don't mean by like long silences. I'm talking about. So I've noticed this with VLC and certain, uh, series content that I've been watching. And I'd noticed it earlier, actually, before on a couple of Asus devices because they had it inbuilt in their video player. But if there was, say you're watching, I don't know, some series, whatever, and then there's an episode of silence in that scene, right? Then it would like, machine learning, AI, whatever you want to call it, buzzword, but it would kind of dampen down the noise, so it would become even quieter, and it would actually start getting slightly off-putting because it would just almost. And I remember the amount of times when I thought, has the sound just gone?
Mm-hmm.
And then you'd gone, and then then somebody else would start talking again, and then the ambient noise that was there, because that's what you were hearing, just the ambient noise of the room or the ambient
Yeah.
noise of the scene,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. And I found it, and I couldn't, on the Asus I couldn't switch it off. I'll probably be able to switch that thing off on VLC if I fiddle around with it. But yeah, I found that a bit odd actually. It was, and I would notice okay, there's no ambient noise from this room that was there just a second ago.
Yeah.
You know.
There is a
And
tendency when you're editing to it's not being perfect, but you're trying to get, so as you're listening to it, you're being very careful about people's voices and trying not to clip down too much of what they're saying. And like Bill said, you have to be careful about quiet parts and not over compressing or, reducing volume in where you don't need to. But and I did this a lot on when I started making YouTube videos. I would make it so that my voice was the only thing you could hear. Never any of the background, never any breathing, never any clicking of the keyboard, and it made it sound very dead, very fake. And you're absolutely right. So what I learned is that whenever you reduce noise, you don't reduce it to nothing. You reduce it 50%. Or, so you're leaving the hint of those noises there without it being like in your face, because when you're using a microphone this close, you pick up a lot of mouth sounds, a lot of breathing. I mean, your nose might be whistling, like all kinds of weird stuff that you really don't want to hear, because you don't have a conversation with someone when they're
Well, yeah, I
6
mean,
inches from your ear.
yeah, and no, but I mean, so it makes the whole thing sound more natural, and
Yeah.
it's that thing. It's that thing. If sometimes you do get, it's a bit less nowadays, or maybe it's just the algorithm's not showing me as much these days. But you'd go on YouTube, and sometimes you would have guides, whatever, and it would be a computerized voice. This is how to root your phone. Do you know what I mean? Because maybe somebody's not an English speaker, native language, whatever. So they've made the YouTube video with the computer voice. And it's, okay, maybe now with AI, it might be a little bit better. But I mean,
even though, so, and I've been saying this to my wife because she keeps prodding me. She's like, oh, you should try to do voiceover. And, everybody says they love your voice and yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, you know what? Voiceover is dead. Like AI has completely killed it. And she's like, no, every time I listen to something that's supposed to be like advanced AI, yes, the tonal quality of the voice has gotten much better. It sounds much more realistic, but inflection, emotion, all of that stuff is still so far off. And it's really jarring. It pulls you out of the experience. So you've got this rich voice that's reading something, and all of a sudden, instead of a normal flow of how a human being would speak, there's this weird, pause or inflection or, different tone, or like something that is like the uncanny valley of when you're looking at something and you can see that it's not, human. It's the same thing in the quality of the voice. And so I still think, and that's going to be a very difficult thing to program. Right.
I think you're right, because we send so much emotion, and we send
nuance.
I mean, the words we speak are only really half of
it's
the
less than
information that we're.
I mean, the people talk about something like communication. 80% of it is nonverbal.
Yeah.
Only 20% is the actual words that you say. And if you are taking a lot of the nonverbal out by just having audio only, then the slight changes in pitch, the inflections, the nuances, they mean so much more. I would say, though, that I think a lot of it is just to do with the relative newness. I'm trying to think of a better word, but I can't think of a better word. But, we're still at the emergent end of AI. It's still an evolving new technology. The reason I say this is I was chatting with one of my colleagues the other day, and we both like the same kind of music. We're both, big fans of 90s and, 2000s metal, whatever. And I was telling him, have you seen these AI things on YouTube? And I said, what? Well, basically, they've taken songs and, what if it was sung by someone else?
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And it's AI.
Yeah.
So, and I was telling him, like, because we both like Oasis, and I was saying, there's some of the Noel songs that have been AI'd that if Liam had sang them, and things like that. Anyway, obviously I must have been searching for this on YouTube, because the algorithm showed something today where, it was Chester Bennington doing, again, some different song. Chester Bennington, the late singer of Linkin Park, in my opinion, one of the best bands of the 21st century. But and there were songs like, I don't know, by Adele or by other people that this AI was doing, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
when I listened to the one at the top, it was like, whoa, man, that's just nuts. It does sound like Chester singing. But then I started listening, and the further older videos that I got, the less and less it sounded, like him. It sounded, it just wasn't as good. And that's when I thought, this is the AI learning. the first couple of samples and videos are from a year ago or whatever that the guys put up on YouTube, and these ones now, the one that I listened to today was like posted the other day. So the AI has learnt in that year to sound more and more like Chester,
Yeah.
So I think you're right, but it may just be a question of time
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. I mean,
before before AI
yeah.
does get to that level.
Well, so this is where I think AI, the lines blur a little bit. So in terms of, let's say, audio production, I was looking a couple days ago. So I started where I started initially years ago, which is with Audacity, right? That's the free tool. It's allows me to do multiple tracks, but I quickly ran into the same problems that I ran into back then, which was it's a destructive editor, meaning that as you go and as you make changes to things and you save it, you're moving forward from that point, meaning that you've fundamentally altered the material itself. So there's no, and what I mean by that is if I do a noise reduction or a truncate silence or something that, and this is a 2 hour long recording, and I spot check, I don't know, 10 minutes of it, and it all sounds good, super, let's move forward. But then I get 10 steps down the line and realize, oh no, that truncate silence cut, some really important part of this recording. Now, I have the original still as a separate file. I can go back and I can splice it in or whatever, but now I've lost the other 10 changes. I mean, it's just messy, right? And so what you then graduate to is a DAW, a digital audio workstation, where, and Audacity is doing this with real-time plugins. So basically, you're not changing fundamentally the underlying file. You're just adding effects on top of it. And those effects can be literally turned off and on or changed, tweaked as you go, where you're not altering that file. And so it's non-destructive in that sense. That's the difference
So
between the two.
Audacity has somewhere around version 3.1 something or other. They've stopped using the two file saving thing that they had, and now they're using a SQLite database backend, and so it's less. You can actually save complete. What do they call it? Lossless copies of the project now, so it's not destructive in the way that it was before. You have to go in and enable all that though, but it is an option.
Maybe that's why, because it wasn't behaving that way. It was still behaving as the way it used to.
It by default, I don't think it's on because it uses the SQLite, but then when you save the project and close it, and then you go back to it the next day, all of your undo and redo history is gone.
This is actually a good segue, actually.
Well,
The segue is that I was thinking yesterday when I realized that we'd have to kind of change the timings for OTC today. What am I going to talk about? And I know we say this thing we don't plan beforehand, but obviously things come to mind, isn't it? And I was thinking to myself about I'm sure you guys have seen it, the adverts for the new Google Pixel 8 and the Google Pixel 8 Pro.
Yeah.
And then there's so much about Magic Eraser, Magic Editor, Audio Eraser, and all this kind of stuff, right? And I've listened to podcasts which have gone on about, well, this is a problem because now basically you're going to end up with memories that didn't actually happen, photos of things which, yes, everybody was smiling, but nobody was smiling in that way at the time you took the shot, right? And that's why you had to use best take, or yes, you did jump, but you didn't jump that high, or yes, you were posing in the gym, but there was a guy behind you, or whatever it might be. And I thought to myself, surely this is a problem rather than a feature. If you think about it in one sense, you'll be like, why would people want this? Why would people want to have fake memories, fake photos, fake videos, or whatever it might be? And then it reminded me of, because I've been to the gym, and it reminded me that in the gym that I go to, they've recently put a ban on tripods, because people are bringing tripods and phones and filming themselves working out, right? I mean, so sad. It's not something I would do, obviously, but I mean, people are doing that, and so all of this was kind of swirling in my mind, yeah. And I thought to myself, basically, everybody is trying to turn their life into a TV show. They're trying to make their life cooler, better, nicer. The memories are just that bit better. The sound is just that bit better. The video is just that bit better. The Instagram post is just that bit cooler. And all that sort of thing. And it's a case of, it's editing in the same way that we're talking about audio editing, right? But it's audio editing with a narrative of trying to make things look as polished and as cool and as sexy and as whatever as possible, right? And that's why everybody's going for it, and that's why it's not a bug, it's a feature. It's, yes, completely make up the fact that you actually didn't make that jump that high, but make it up because it looks cooler and it looks better and it's better to share and this, that, and the other. And I just thought, wow, talk about the influence of television and stuff on our psyche. Yeah. That we're trying to make our lives a bit like that, especially if you ever watch any of the 90s sitcoms. So I've been watching the reboot of Frasier, which I know is not a 90s sitcom, but it's obviously very played in that same way. And I thought some of the jokes that were happening and the way that people were saying it was like, I've seen people act like this at work. People will make a funny comment in that same way. And I thought, wow, man, we're all stars of our own TV shows. I don't know if that's too big a leap to go from, but I thought it was a nice segue because we're talking about editing and how you can manipulate stuff to make it fit a narrative.
Well, and I think that, what I see a lot of is people using filters. And that was sort of, for a long time, people using the filters to sort of soften, lighting and to sort of, there are, there are girls in my family who I don't know that I've ever seen a non-filtered picture of, you know what I mean? So they've created this sort of persona almost in a way where it's not them, it is them, but there's a layer that's on top of them. And so you're not getting the true representation of what they actually look like. Yeah, sure. I mean, it's their face and whatever. And I think that a lot of this stuff is sort of a progression of that. Yeah, I mean, like when you were talking about Magic Eraser, this is so dumb, but like the first thing I thought of was a lot of times you'll look at old photos and it'll occur to you like someone's in the background and you'll look at it and then all of a sudden it becomes more interesting because there's some, you know, quirk to the photo where it's like either a relative that you haven't thought of for, a couple decades or I mean, all I'm saying is there's a compositional aspect to a photograph that maybe you catch something that you like photobombing. That was all the big thing for a while, right? Or like, so.
But that brings, see, ironically, that's what actually makes the memory, isn't it? That's what makes, because the imperfectness of the situation is often what's the interesting thing, because you'd be like, taking photos and it'd be like, oh, do you remember that old bloke who was out in the garden behind, and and that's why the dog's looking the other direction because he was making a noise or whatever it might be,
Right.
rather than this kind of very perfectly manicured, professionally done, kind of, as I said, almost like, everybody's a star in the TV show. Everybody wants to be a star of their own modeling program or whatever it might be, to show themselves as looking as cool and as brilliant as whatever.
Well, we live in a world of content now, right? And everybody can create their own content. And so it's not about capturing a memory, it's about producing something. And, we've just been talking about producing audio for a podcast, and that's the point, is you're trying to make a product that is, easy to listen to, that is interesting, that, is worth the time and effort it takes to make something, versus you're just having a family get together and like you want to take pictures. It should be less about, producing something polished, I guess. And there's a certain, I don't know. There's a certain sort of charm to the lack of production value, right? It's just like, so my wedding, we had the professional photographer, and of course, all those photos are amazing, right? I mean, they're taken by someone who knows what they're doing, that has amazing equipment, yada, yada, yada. We also had point and shoot click cameras, on the tables. And I'll be damned if some of the best pictures from our wedding aren't just dumb, you know, crappy
Yeah.
quality pictures. There's one of my grandfather in profile sitting and blowing bubbles because we had little bubbles on all the tables. And it's just like my 75-year-old grandfather blowing bubbles. Like, where in the hell would I ever get that picture from? I mean, I couldn't tell him, hey, Pap, blow bubbles or something. Like, you capture those moments because it was something that was just there. And most of them were kids picking them up, or,
Yeah.
but, there's a certain spontaneity and a certain sort of, you're capturing a moment in time versus producing. And this isn't,
Exactly.
I'm
Exactly
I'm
my
giving
point.
you what actually happened versus what I want you to see. Those are the
Yes.
so,
Yeah. Yeah.
but to sort of circle back a little bit on the production part of like the podcast. So I was looking at moving to the different editing options, and so like I mentioned, Audacity and Destructive, and then a DAW, which is less so. I mean, you can layer on the effects, and then I'm like, okay, well, I know Adobe has a podcasting app or yeah, audio production app, and then I know that there are other companies that are providing software. And what are the features that they provide? And it was interesting to see that AI has come in to help with removing silence, with removing ahs and ums and ohs and stuff that those what do they call them, connecting words, or so like that's somewhere where I can see AI being a huge help to just do a first pass and remove a bunch of that junk,
Mm.
line up the waveforms perfectly. Maybe that's somewhere else where it can, help out.
Ooh,
So
I figured
I'm
out something on that front. For the longest time, I'd been having trouble with Audacity. My timing on my recordings, as well as a couple of other people, like Joe's, is pretty bad. Would decay throughout the duration of the recording, and it was not a predictable decay either. It was kind of all over the place. Um, and then I discovered that this Scarlett box that I use, this Focusrite Scarlett, by default is set up at 48 megahertz sample rate, and Audacity is recording at 44.1. And so I set my box at 44.1, and it kept time throughout the entire recording. So there's that. Um, it's slightly anecdotal because it's only worked twice now, but it's the first time my recordings have stayed on track throughout the entire recording process. Now, none of this matters on Windows for some reason. Windows must be using some other method to keep time, but on Linux, if you've got a malignment of sample rates, your timing's going to be
Wait,
off.
are
And
you
then,
saying that Linux has jank? Are you saying that Linux has things that just don't seem to work or work properly? Yeah, I mean, I had a bit of an epic fail on that sort of front actually this week, where
only one?
yes, only only one epic fail this week, which was the my so we've got an extra phone in the house. My wife wanted there to be parental controls on it because my daughter uses it, which is fair enough. And so I thought, now what would a normal person do? A normal person would just reset the phone and then log in using, Android's Google Family Link type of stuff. That's what a normal person would do. Me, on the other hand, well, this was a phone that already had Lineage on it. So I thought, well, if I'm going to be wiping it, let's try a different custom ROM. Because, I mean, we've been talking about it. What's the worst that could happen? I mean, what's the worst that could happen? Right? Anywho, so um, I start the process. I get the wiki of the ROM that I want to install, and it's telling me to do a few more things than normal. Wipe this partition, wipe that partition, put a new partition table. And I thought, oh, lineage isn't normally this complicated. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Plus, because it's got lineage, so it means it's already got a custom recovery already on there. Anyway, so I do all the steps. I do everything in according to the wiki. And then I get to the last thing, which is flash the actual update package. So I go to flash the update package, and I then get a thing coming up on the phone saying that the SPL, which I'm assuming is the security patch, is from on the device already, was from the 1st of November, but the ROM that I'm flashing had a older security patch, and so it will not flash. And I was like, okay, and transfer failed, aborted. And I'm like, okay, fine. I now have a dead phone. because because in the process of flashing, yes, it figured that bit out, but it didn't stop deleting the entire OS that was on there already. And so
this
yes,
is
I
why
now
I
have
just I don't have time for the phones. I'm sorry. Or the tablets. I mean, I know that you guys get into it and all that, but the phones are always just a fartsicle for this kind of stuff, And the tiniest little mistake, and look what you got. You got basically nothing.
Yeah,
So,
and so I've had to then go off and buy another phone.
oh my gosh.
And then for this one, I just I got some cheap. It is actually when you think about it. Actually, it is amazing how good technology has become cheap. I mean, I was reading an article the other day saying, it's 10 years now since the first Moto G was launched. And, I don't know if you remember, it came out, it was like £150, less than $200. And, you had a HD screen. And yes, it was 8 gig of storage. But for that kind of price, it was the first good budget phone that you didn't feel like you were wading through treacle trying to get anything done.
Well, again, you're the product being sold here.
Oh yeah,
with
100%.
Whether it's an expensive phone or a cheap phone, and more so with the cheap phone, a lot of the price on some of that cheap technology is subsidized by third parties that have their crapware on there and what have you, and then the advertisements and things like that you'll get. You have a lot more lockdown stuff on a cheaper phone, I've noticed, especially on the Android side. Well, it would only be on the Android side, but applications you can't get rid of. You might not even be able to disable them, simply because.
And that's true definitely of the Chinese ones, I must say. The Xiaomi's, Realme's, Redmi's and all that. But so anyway, I thought to myself, if I'm going to have to buy something new, why not actually get another Motorola? It's been a long time since we've had a Motorola. See what the Moto G is like now. Now there's obviously about 15 different versions of it now. The G31, the G32, the G56, or all these phone naming conventions have always been terrible, and they always manage to get worse. It's just like, for example, Sony now have Xperia 1 Mark V, a Xperia 10 Mark V, and the funniest of all, an Xperia 5 Mark V. It's kind of like, okay. So do you want to get the 5 Mark IV, the 5 Mark V, or the 5 Mark? And it's just, oh god. Anyway, so I got this, and actually I was surprised actually as to, it was relatively clean when it comes to that, the bloatware and stuff like that. I think this is one of those kind of Black Friday sales where they're trying to get rid of old stock. So that's how I managed to get it relatively cheap. It was probably it would have normally been probably about $170, $180, and I got it for like 90 something because I think they were just trying to get rid of stock. So I use that to my advantage, I suppose, in that sense. But even then, even if we're gonna say that it's a £200 phone, right? 90 hertz display, decent speakers, dual SIM with a micro SD card, headphone jack, yeah, I mean, it's not going to wow anybody with this photography,
but this is where, and I don't disagree with you. It's great that we have these lower priced options, but if you're willing to use last year's phone,
yeah, and you've got it again. You've already got that, yeah.
Well, no, if you're happy with a used one, which is what I do, then you can get a $900, $1,000 phone for $300.
Yeah.
and you're not making any sort of compromises with quality because it is literally the top end of the market. And, you know, so I try to find those ones where this is a person who gets a new phone every year just because that's what they like to do and they have the money to do it. And it's like, yeah. And their devices are perfect. They've always had a screen cover, they've always been in a case. And you're basically getting a brand new phone, of course, minus the time that it was used, uh, for such a lower price. And like, I don't even honestly understand why anyone pays full price for a new device.
So I
Not
think
anymore, no.
yeah. I mean, you reminded me of two videos, actually, two YouTube videos by the YouTuber Mr. Who's the Boss, right? He did one a couple of weeks ago, and there's one that I remember from maybe about 2-3 years ago. The one a couple of weeks ago was, well, he took a $400 phone and he took a $1,200 phone, right? And he said, is the $1,200 phone 3 times better than the $400 one?
These are
right?
new phones.
And these were new, right? So the ones that
Okay.
he took, right? So the ones that he got it was a Xiaomi Redmi Note 13 Pro Plus, and he had a Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, right? So, and as he went through it, he said, look, yeah, the cameras aren't as good, but they're probably about 70% as good, 60% if you want to be difficult, if you want to be really particular. Okay. Now if you want to look at the screen, yeah, the screen is probably 85% the same as the other one. So the idea, so yes, you pay 400 quid, you pay a third, but you're not getting a third of the phone, right?
Yeah.
And this is that thing about the delta, it's a law of diminishing returns. It becomes a plateau if you were to do a graph. The more money you spend, the less you get. The other video that I remember was from a couple of years ago where he said last year's flagship versus this year's mid-ranger, right? Mm-hmm. And he actually had, I think, by the way, I'm not sponsored by Mr. Who's the Boss or anything like that, because I've just realized this is the second time probably I've mentioned him. But of course, if he wants to sponsor me and give me money and free stuff, I have no problem with that whatsoever.
Absolutely.
But yeah, and I can't remember which phones he used, but I think he had like a 2-year-old phone. That's what it was. I think there was one he was testing a phone from 2020 versus 2018, or 2022 versus 2020, or something like that. Yeah, there was a 2-year difference, and basically the older phone was better. The older premium phone, last year's best, was still 2 years later better than the mid-range, which was still good, no doubt. Yeah, it was good value for money, this, that, and the other. But now that the prices were equal, you were still getting more phone for your money by going for a older device. And interestingly, after I bought this, the Motorola, I hadn't really checked the specs out very well because I just seen the price and gone, okay, that's fine, that'll be good enough for my daughter, right? And I started actually like, okay, so it's got a Snapdragon 680. Let's see what that's like compared to the older phone, which was a OnePlus 6. So that's from 2018, running a Snapdragon 845, right?
Right.
The 845 still beats it on admittedly synthetic benchmarks, admittedly.
Yeah.
But in raw, even though this chip is 3-4 years newer, it is still something like the older chip is still 20-30% more performant, which again shows really not just getting a year-old phone. Sometimes you can get. I think there was another YouTuber Juan Carlos Bagnell, who said that we attained peak performance with the Snapdragon 855, and then since then it's all been diminishing returns since then.
Well, which speaks to they have to put out new product. They have to to differentiate. It can't just be the same processor over and over. So hey, well, let's make it an 860, even though it's really probably not much different, if any better. And I think what you're seeing is the difference between just the age of a device that was built to top end specs versus something being built to a lesser spec on purpose, right? So that's the difference, meaning that yes, on paper they may look as though, so like you said, the one from 2 years ago versus the mid-range one now, on paper may look very similar, but once you dig into it, well, the 2-year-old one just has better cameras, just because it does. It has a better coprocessor just because it does, and that type of stuff. And you get into the components they use to build the top end one are just inherently better. They just happen to be slightly older, and that age isn't as important as something being built lesser on purpose, right?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I think you find this whenever you go to, if you go to more, I don't want to call them emerging markets because now they're pretty, established markets now, Southeast Asia,
right.
India, Brazil, places like this. But, okay, but places, shall we say, that are more price sensitive, let me put it that way, right? For example, whenever I've been to India, the amount of phones is just unbelievable. And they're literally at every, if we were to talk about...
You mean the models that are available?
Yeah, the models. Yeah, there's just so many. 50, and you might say, well, this one's $50 more than that. What's the big deal? Why have they bothered even making it? Well, $50 is a lot of money in India,
Right.
and if you're buying your first phone, your only phone, the phone that you haven't got a computer, this is your gateway to the internet and the world, then those what seem minor price reductions in dollars and pounds and euros suddenly are much more significant when you're talking about rupees or yuan or rupiah or whatever. And interestingly, though, when you do actually start digging in, as you kind of said, when you start digging into some of these really kind of budget mid-range phones, they're not actually that new with the components that they use. So, for example, I remember there was one that I saw, and I was like, wow, it's got 256 gig of storage and this, that, and the other. And then went on GSM Arena. I love GSM Arena. It's a great place to nerd out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Great place to nerd out. And then you realize that, oh, this only has UFS 2.2. Oh, this only has UFS 2.1. That's where they've saved the money. They've shaved it. It's only a little amount, but they've shaved it off just so they can hit that price point. Like you say, it's been designed. It's not been designed, let's make the best product we can and then sell it, right? We need a product at $200. We need a product at $250. We need a product at $300. Okay, what can we make, and how do we hit that price point? Do we hit that with slightly cutting the corners on the components? Do we do it by cutting the corners not cutting corners, by loading up with bloatware and adware and stuff like that, like Bill was saying, that you can't get rid of? How, what way can we get and what will people not notice? And yes, if you're only spending 200 quid for a phone, and you're living out in the sticks of South Asia, is the fact that it's USB 2 rather than USB 3 are really that big a deal? If it's DDR3 RAM rather than DDR5, is that really such a big deal? Probably not. So people won't notice it, and so people will still get what they think is, wow, this is brilliant. And then, yeah, as I said, if you actually start digging into it, then you start seeing, oh, okay, so this is where they've cut the corner. This is where they cut the corner. Now, this is admittedly a first world problem for me. I mean, I'm the guy that likes to have the best phone and the best cameras and the best this and the best that. Yeah, but
Right.
I am not the target demographic for most. I'm not where they're going to make money. Put it that way.
Yeah.
Most companies are not going to make money on me.
Right. That is most people can be happy with just a device that is capable enough to do the things they want to do with it, versus people who are into technology, into that space, and understand the nuances. All of a sudden, and this is like I've said with, Linux versus Mac and Windows. If I didn't know about Linux, I would probably be perfectly happy to use Windows or Mac and just not care, because it wouldn't be in my mind the idea that I could change anything I wanted. I would just accept the fact that this is the operating system, and this is the way it is. And if I want to get something done, then I just have to do it that way. Whereas, because my mind has been altered by the concept that I can change
Linux is a
anything I want.
mind-altering drug.
Well, it is, in the sense that once you understand that you can make these things and make it your own and change literally anything you want to change within, reason, then all of a sudden when you're using something like Windows, it becomes limiting. Whereas before, you didn't know any better. You didn't care.
Yeah.
Like, it didn't make a difference. And I think phones are very similar like that. Like, you get a phone, it has a camera, it has, a web browser. You can make calls on it. You can text on it, or whatever the things, the main important things to you. And that's fine. It just does those things. And all of a sudden, though, you start going to GSM Arena, or you start reading, and it's like, oh well, that one's got this slightly better thing, and then all of a sudden you're psyching yourself out, where it's like, oh well, this phone isn't good enough anymore. Now I need to get a better phone. And it's, I try really hard not to do that to myself. And honestly, I've kind of undone some of it, where I'm proving to myself that older hardware and older technology, the only difference, like you said, is maybe it's one, processor family generation less than the newer one. What am I really getting? When I look at new hardware today, I'm not seeing huge innovation. There aren't
Yeah.
like major leaps in phones are this way. What is differentiating 2 years ago, 3 years ago to the current model? And to me, Pixel was the only really innovative and captivating thing, because they're of the on system type of stuff that you can do with, altering images, with the voice transcription, and, the way that the software handles the cameras. And like, there's a lot of stuff that Pixel does on the phone itself with the tensor chips, and that was interesting. But everything else is just, I don't care that the camera is 16 megapixels versus 14. Like, it just, those
Yeah.
things really are
Yeah,
not
they don't.
foundationally different. And
They're
so,
not noticeable. They're not noticeable. And this is the thing, I think, that, as I said, the law of diminishing returns. People will like to use Geekbench scores or Antutu scores as benchmarks, but
right.
really, that's just it's a synthetic thing which can easily be manipulated. Hello, Samsung, and so that it doesn't mean anything in reality. So again, one of the YouTubers that I watch, he says, I'm not going to use benchmarks to try and figure it out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put some tasks on it. And so he does a video edit. He does a batch photo process. He exports a video file. There's a couple of these kind of real world tests, as it were, right? And you get some interesting results in places where you didn't think. Right. So, for example, the newest one will be slightly better, but it would be like, it exported the video in 10 seconds less. I mean, is that really worth it?
Exactly.
Something like that. But then, especially when you got like different, I don't want to say classes of chips, but different manufacturers. So, for example, Google Tensor, as an example, it's a custom built chip. It's made by Samsung, but it's custom, designed by Google. Obviously, you've got all the Snapdragon stuff. Then you've got like, the MediaTek chips, right? And find that there's actually some subtle differences between them. So the Tensor, even though for many of the things is lower than the equivalent Qualcomm chip, when it comes to video editing, it's amazingly quick. It's unbelievable. It's obviously something to do with the design of the way those cores are, because I know that Google have been trying to maximize the machine learning and the AI kind of capabilities.
Right.
It meant, it was beating phones, out of the world. A Pixel 6a would, export a video file much quicker than the Galaxy S22 of that same year.
Yeah.
Even though on paper it's different. Similarly, when it came to gaming performance, you found that last year's Snapdragon was better than the Tensor, because the Tensor wasn't built for gaming in that sense. The Snapdragon had more horsepower and can do it. A MediaTek, a MediaTek chip also had some interesting things, like it could hit higher peak frame rates, but couldn't sustain those frame rates. So if you're playing a game, it would go up to 100 frames per second, and then it would drop down to 20. Well, that was actually worse as an experience if you're playing a game than if you had a consistent 40 FPS. Do you know what I mean? Because you would always feel like the game is lagging, and they would always feel like the game is slowing down. So I found those differences more interesting than the raw number. This is betterer because the numberer is betterer.
Well, so I wanted to talk to you about this specifically, because you seem to really follow this type of stuff. So I think that Apple with the M series chips has really changed my thinking about what ARM can be. I've always thought of ARM as being lesser, lower power. I mean, yes, it's good at being a mobile chip and that kind of thing. But in terms of just like desktop or real computer performance, right? I've always discounted a ARM as being like it's never going to be an actual, powerful chip. And Apple sort of really changed that thinking in my mind. And then I saw that like now Snapdragon they're making chips that are supposed to be like desktop class, and I hear
Yeah,
that
yeah.
ARM chips are going to be a
The
big thing
X
in data
Elite, yeah,
centers. And so,
yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts?
Okay, so my thoughts would be, firstly, ARM has been plenty powerful for a long time. Did Eric just disappear? Okay, well, just as he asked me a question, I came up with an interesting thing. I can't hear you, by the way. Are you muted? I still can't hear you, Bill. Can you hear me? Okay, now it's just me. All right, Bill's back on my screen. I don't know where Eric went. Oh, Eric is back.
I just reloaded.
All right. It's always the easiest thing to do, isn't it?
Of
Switch it
course,
off
it
and on
helps
again.
to turn your mute off when people are trying to.
Yes,
Right.
William.
Let me put
Right.
a little marker on the Audacity feed on that one.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'd gotten
Yeah,
to the
yeah.
point where I was asking about what do you think about ARM kind of coming in and becoming more of a player in
Okay.
like actual.
So that's a very good question, and it is something that I've been following. I think actually, if you're going to look at raw horsepower, ARM hit parity with a lot of desktop class CPUs probably about 3 years ago, I would say. The issue was to do with the applications and the software that could utilize that power. And a lot of it, because there just isn't as much money in it, making. So I'm talking about from the Android side for the time being. There wasn't just as much money in it, of trying to make, the most performant, well optimized thing for Android, because there was 15 different chips and there were 15 different versions of the operating system and this, that, and the other. You had to make as if you're an app developer, you had to make something that worked on everything, not necessarily that worked really well on one thing and was not so good on the others. And so people weren't kind of looking in that direction. Then Apple basically said, we'll have a go, right? I mean, obviously they've been making their ARM chips already because they've been making the A series chips for the iPhones. And it was on the basis of, if I remember correctly, I think it was the A14, or it might have been the A12. I can't remember. But one of those two chips is what was the base for the first M series ARM chip, which they put in the MacBook Airs and MacBook Pros and whatever. And so now you had a single chip. Now you have that vertical integration that Apple has always had. And so they were able to design a chip and get the most performance out of it, and still get that kind of epic battery life that you would get with that you do get with ARM devices in general. And I think that made a lot of the Android OEMs and the Android chip manufacturers, whatever, kind of sit up and go, well, our devices can do this already. It's just that we haven't got the outlet for that horsepower. It's the thing about putting like a 6-liter V6 into a Nissan Micra. That's kind of where Android phones were. So now it's like, okay, so now we need to optimize the applications, optimize the ecosystem and things like that. And that's one of the things that Google have been doing, Samsung as well. We know Samsung Dex and all that sort of thing. And now when the concept has now gone for, okay, well, what about full on Windows on ARM? Yes, I know they started off, there was a Windows RT with the original Surface, but that was, that was kind of dead in the water at that time, mainly because it was, it was all, there was a lot of the whole Windows 8 hate going on at the time. But, over the last couple of years, Snapdragon have been working a lot more closely with Microsoft. They've made specific chips, 8CX, 7CX chips, and there are SKUs of the Surface which run that. They haven't necessarily been that brilliant so far, partly because of how bloated Windows is, probably, right? But this year, it seems like they've hit some kind of performance ceiling, with the X Elite, which was the one that was announced at the last Snapdragon Summit. And, okay, it's synthetic benchmarks. So who believes synthetic benchmarks?
Right.
Having just said how rubbish they are. But the synthetic benchmarks show that this is already outperforming an M1 Mac.
Wow.
with the same kind of battery life. I really think the issue is going to be the apps, the software, the ecosystem around it. And if you've got something that can actually leverage that power, you've always had that V6 in your Nissan Micra. You've always had the, Qualcomm Snapdragon Gen 1, 8 Gen 1, or the 888 or the 865 or 8 Gen 2 or whatever, whichever versions you've got. You've always had a really powerful chip. You've just had no way to utilize it. Now that, as I said, I think manufacturers are taking more notice of that, and the fact that people are doing a lot more things productivity based on their mobile devices, their foldables or whatever, then I think people are, the next year or two will be very interesting, because the one thing I would say is they put the M1, Apple put the M1 in the Mac, right? MacBook, and it was amazing, right? The performance and this is a guy who doesn't like Apple, right? I'm saying it, right?
Yeah.
The performance is amazing. The battery life is amazing. They put that same M1 chip into an iPad, right? And the battery life is amazing. Well, it was already amazing. The performance is amazing. Yeah, but you couldn't actually do what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
The software wasn't there. So you had all this headroom, and it was your Nissan Micra with your V6. That's exactly what it was.
Yeah, and I think so. When I look at it from my sort of outsider perspective, just not having spent any time really using ARM devices outside of an Android context, I look at the challenge, and like you say, overcoming the software gap, and I just think that that's probably the hardest thing to get my mind around, is why there are so many different standards. Why ARM isn't just a consistent thing, and like it makes it seem like it's kind of impossible unless you're a company like Apple that can put all your resources into a single, instruction set, a single
vertical integration. There's at the end, there's a reason why people try and copy the Apple playbook. There is a reason why Google has a Google ecosystem, why Samsung has its own ecosystem of services and things around it, even though it doesn't need to. It's completely superfluous, right? Or some of the other things, the fact that you've now got more interoperability. You've got your Samsung phone and your Samsung laptop, even though it runs Windows, will now talk to each other much better. And that's before you get into the specific manufacturers, each having their own. I've got a OnePlus at the minute. Apparently, if I had a OnePlus Pad, I'll be able to just, flip things from one to the other and not being able to do that. So vertical integration is, and it's always been the reason why Linux has never been as performant on hardware, I find. In the past, like we were talking about with your tablet at the last Mincast, how the battery life isn't as good and stuff like that. It's because, you've got a generic, all size fits all version, rather than something that is tuned to that hardware. And same again with the Google Tensor and its video editing. Why is it a chip that is consistently bad at other things, fantastic at this one point? Well, because the way that the chips are designed makes it good at that point. So I do think we have got the title for the podcast, though, that Linux is a very dangerous drug. I can't remember who said it, but something. Yeah, unmute yourself, Bill. audio editor
I'm
Bill.
awake. I'm awake now. I'm
yeah,
awake.
yeah. Our man, who's the one who's responsible for all the audio, and
Oh,
just
man,
spoke to us
that's right,
at length
right.
about how he's so great at Audacity and everything. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm
Unmute.
just a pro at Audacity. You ask me anything,
Do
I'll
you,
tell you.
do you use Audacity? Do you use
I,
Arch as well, by the way?
yes, I do. In fact,
Oh, really? No, I
most
didn't know anything
most
about
of
that.
our
at all.
editing gets done on Arch because I have to do it on the road, and that's what my
Oh,
laptops
Arch
are
is just
running.
too annoying. I'm getting annoyed with Arch now. It's just
You know,
why is everything more complicated than it needs to be?
I got to tell you though, for years, up until I started on Mintcast, and the only reason I installed Mint is because I felt like, okay, I'm on Mintcast, might be
Yeah,
an okay
yeah,
idea to use it. That way I know
yeah.
what I'm on about a little bit. But up to that point, I would try I'd hear about these new distros trying out this new thing, and I would try it, and I would always end up running into this roadblock where I have like an esoteric use case for something, and with Arch you can just do it. You can just
Well,
bend
see,
it to
that's
your
the
will.
problem. Well, that's the problem. You see, now this could be a me problem rather than an Arch problem, all right? And the fact that I don't know as much about it, but whenever I run into this kind of relatively esoteric problem, whatever it might be, I can do it on Ubuntu. I can do it on anything Debian, well, Ubuntu based. I can't seem to do it on Arch. So the example I was saying about my fantastic experiment trying to, flash a custom ROM, right? I should have probably taken this as a sign actually, but I shouldn't even bloody install ADB properly. I couldn't even get into control the bootloader easily. And I'd gone to the AUR and I'd gone the package and this, that, and the other. And after a while, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this on my Ubuntu machine, which made it much easier for me to fail. I mean, obviously I still failed, but at least I knew. At least
I think the
at least
biggest
it didn't put
problem
roadblocks in the way.
the biggest problem people run into is when you install something on Arch, if there's a system D unit associated with that package, it doesn't get just enabled by default, which I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with that, but their attitude towards it is that this operating system makes zero assumptions about the user. But my argument to that is, yeah, but you can assume if somebody's installing a package, they want it to work right after installing it.
No,
That's not an
no.
unreasonable assumption at all. And
Oh, I don't know, William. I don't know. That's
but
heresy.
it will not by default start the system D units. This is why especially when you're first starting to use Arch, you basically need to have the Arch wiki open all the time. And whenever you go to install anything, or when you're going to do anything, and you need to look and see if there's an Arch wiki page on that particular piece of software or on this thing that you're trying to do, because it will outline step by step, what you need to, right from the installing to the enabling of the associated system D units, and then the other, sometimes, like for example, the big bugaboo for me is getting virtual machines running in a KVM using something like Virt Manager. Well, on our on something Debian based, you apt install Virt Manager and everything works. Well, not so on Arch. You've got to install, if you want the QEMU backend, you got to install that. You've got to install the KVM backend. You have to enable. There's like 4 system D units you got to enable, and then you got to reboot the system. And you got to know to do all those things, to install all those things and enable them.
So
And
on that unbelievable bombshell that Arch is difficult,
I
should we
mean,
wrap up?
yeah, we should wrap up because that is a rabbit hole to beat the band.
Yeah, mix
Yeah,
whatever metaphors you want.
real quick, it's not really an announcement. I've mentioned it before. I am eventually going to migrate the RSS feed for this show away from where it currently is on Red Circle. I'm gonna move it to an archive.org based meaning the RSS feed will come from our website instead of Red Circle, because I'm just wanting to move away from third-party platforms altogether. And there will be an overlapping period. I have not created a entry for the show for the second feed on Podcast Index or Apple Podcasts yet. I just haven't had time, but I'm gonna keep announcing this until it's done. What's gonna end up happening is the very last episode on the old feed will just be something announcing, hey, you need to go over and get the new feed. And then from then on out, it'll be the archive.org feed. Anyway, that's a lot of boring stuff, but eventually it is going to happen. The only reason I didn't do that from the beginning is because when I first started all this stuff, I didn't know how to make RSS feeds or all the nuances to file hosting and all that stuff. Now I know how to do. I've been thrown into the deep end, so to speak, with learning how to manage all these things. And
Yeah, I'm kind of in the middle of that myself right now with Distro Hoppers Digest, and it feels like a very convoluted process compared to what I used to do. So I just need a checklist. That's what I'm kind of saying, is like, give me the breadth and depth of it, and either I can go along with it or I'll make it better.
yeah,
So
and
anyway,
it's a lot to learn, but once you do, I think it's worthwhile.
oh yeah.
But I was
And it's one of those topics that there is an endless supply of alternate ways to do
Right.
everything,
yeah.
literally.
But that is a change that's coming eventually. For now, the RSS feed is coming from Red Circle, and that's what you're getting on your podcast player. If you're listening to the show from the website, that is coming from archive.org, because I'm physically uploading the files to both platforms. And that's something I'd really like to stop doing. So
Automation.
eventually it'll just be archive.org. I like the Creative Commons sort of community aspect that goes along with archive.org, and
Mm-hmm.
the plugin we've got on our website for Blueberry. It's called Blueberry PowerPress, and it does everything. That plugin makes the RSS feed, spreads the content out there. You can even create chapters with it, which I've learned how to do recently on Mintcast. I don't see how that would be useful for this show, but you never know. Anyway, yeah, that's going to happen. We'll be back in 2 weeks when we'll be talking about God knows what. We literally didn't know what we were going to talk about until we got on camera today, but
I
it
still
seems
don't
to
know.
work. It seems to work brilliantly.
And that's why it's off the cuff.
Off the cuff.
Right.
So
That's right.
let us know what you think, folks. Let us know what you think about all this stuff. Crying out loud.
Yeah.
Show at linuxotc.org. Comment directly on the website. Like and subscribe on the YouTube. All the stuff you hear everybody else say. Yeah. See you in 2 weeks. Until then, I've been Bill.
I've been Eric.
And I will do it. I've been Majid.
Thanks, folks. We'll see you.